The barn was still smoking when he found her. Night clung to the land, heavy with the smell of charred timber and burned hay. Sparks drifted in the air like fireflies, glowing for an instant before winking out into the dark. The prairie wind carried the sting of ash into his nostrils, a bitter reminder of destruction. The horses were gone, their empty stalls gaping like missing teeth in a skull. Blackened rafters leaned drunkenly overhead, one final gust away from collapse. And in the center of it, all half buried in soot and shadow, sat a girl, wrapped in a scorched quilt. Her name was Eliza Monroe, though to the man who stumbled across her, she was only a trembling figure caught between firelight and ruin. The quilt swallowed her frame, hanging loose around her shoulders as if the fabric itself could shield her from the world's cruelty. Her face was streaked with soot, her hair tangled with ash and sweat. Her blue eyes glistened, wide and glassy, reflecting both fear and shame. She looked like a ghost abandoned in the ruins of her life. The man who saw her was no ordinary wanderer. He was Takota, a warrior of the Apache, hardened by deserts and battles, marked by scars etched across his chest and arms. His people called him he who brings the storm, and in the silence of the night he carried that storm inside him. He had crossed into this land searching for water for his people, his moccasins tracing silent paths through the dry earth. He had expected to find soldiers or ranchers or nothing at all. Instead, he found her. Her head jerked up when she noticed him standing among the ashes. Her lips quivered. For a heartbeat, silence stretched thin between them, heavy with its weight of fear. And then she whispered the words that would change both their lives. "Please, don't take the blanket off. I am not wearing my clothes." Takota froze. In all the years of bloodshed, of raids and ambushes, he had seen men die with arrows in their chests, seen children cry out for mothers who would never answer, seen women forced to weep over ashes of villages. But never had he seen something like this. A woman of the settlers stripped of her dignity, huddled in smoke and ruin, begging not for life, but for modesty. His dark eyes searched hers. She clutched the quilt tighter, her fingers clawing into the fabric as though it were the only thing tethering her to the earth. Her voice cracked when she spoke again, softer this time, raw as a wound. "They left me here. They thought the fire would finish what they started." Takota's jaw tightened. He turned slowly, scanning the wreckage. His warrior's gaze caught details others might miss. Boot tracks pressed deep in the soot, wagon wheel ruts leading toward the river, the shattered handle of a rifle lying discarded in the dirt. Whoever had done this wasn't Apache. These were white men's boots, white men's guns. The truth cut deeper than any blade. He turned back to her. She flinched when his shadow fell across her, retreating a step though her legs shook under the quilt. To her, he was still a savage in the dark, the enemy whispered of in church pews and saloon corners. Yet his movements betrayed something else, an unfamiliar gentleness, the kind that did not belong to the killers who had left her here. Kneeling down, he lowered himself until his eyes met hers on level ground. His voice was deep, steady, carrying the weight of both command and compassion. "Who did this to you?" The fire popped, sending sparks spinning upward. Eliza's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her throat worked, her lips trembled, but words refused to leave. Only tears spilled silently, cutting streaks through the soot on her cheeks. Takota did not press. He understood silence. He had grown up with it in canyons where wind spoke louder than men. He had seen grief so heavy that no tongue could shape it into speech. The girl hugged the quilt tighter, rocking faintly as if trying to keep herself from breaking apart. In the crackling firelight, Takota saw the faintest glimpse of her shoulders through a tear in the fabric, a glimpse of bruises, dark and violent. His fist curled in the dirt. This was not the work of warriors. This was cruelty without honor, and For the first time in many years, Dakota felt something shift in him, not anger alone, not vengeance, but a strange and uncheckable duty. This girl, this fragile ghost among ashes, had been left to die. Yet she still lived. And perhaps for reasons the spirits alone understood, she had been placed in his path. He rose slowly, towering over her again, his silhouette outlined by the faint glow of embers. The wind moaned through the broken rafters, carrying ash across the prairie like black snow. Dakota's storm-dark eyes narrowed. Whoever had done this was still out there. And he, whether he wished it or not, was now part of her story. Dakota remained crouched among the ashes long after Eliza's whisper faded. The wind whistled through the skeleton of the barn, carrying the faint creak of a collapsing rafter. Smoke stung his eyes, but his gaze stayed fixed on her, this fragile figure clutching a scorched quilt as though it were the last wall between her and the world. She had begged him not to strip that wall away. Her plea still echoed inside him, louder than the crackle of fire, louder than the wail of coyotes beyond the ridge. He rose, scanning the wreckage with the keen eye of a warrior. The land spoke if you knew how to listen. Boot prints dragged through. The soot, deep and uneven, belonging to men who had fled in haste. Wagon ruts scarred the dirt, leading east toward the canyon trail. And in the rubble near Eliza's feet, half buried in ash, he saw a fragment of iron, a broken spur, scorched, but not destroyed. Settler's gear, white men's gear, not Apache. His jaw tightened. He had been raised to believe the whites painted his people as savages to hide their own sins. But standing here, the truth was not rumor, it was smoke and blood and a trembling. Girl who had nearly burned alive. Eliza's voice broke the silence, thin as paper. Why are you here? Her words carried no accusation, only confusion. In her world, an Apache warrior appearing in the ruins of her father's land was an omen of death. Yet he had knelt instead of striking. He had watched instead of taking. Dakota's answer came low and even. My people were driven from the river. I came for water. She flinched at the sound of his voice, but curiosity flickered through her fear. She studied his face, the strong jaw, the sharp cheekbones lit by fire's glow, the dark eyes that seemed carved from obsidian. He was not like the settlers who had tormented her. There was no drunken slur on his tongue, no cruel laughter lurking in his throat. Still, mistrust was a chain she could not slip. She clutched the quilt tighter, shrinking back against the charred beam that supported her. The fabric slipped for an instant, revealing bruises the color of storm clouds blooming across her arm. She yanked the quilt higher, cheeks flushing. Dakota saw. He did not comment. Instead, he turned and walked a short distance away. With practiced movements, he gathered the least charred boards and stacked them, coaxing a small flame to life. He kept his back to her as he worked, his broad shoulders outlined in firelight, the beads of his necklace catching the glow. When the flames licked steady and warm, he placed a leather pouch near the fire. Inside were strips of dried venison, a flask of water wrapped in buckskin, and a folded blanket of his people dyed with earth's red clay and lined with sage-scented wool. He set it down gently, as one might place an offering before a shrine. Then he spoke, still turned away so she would not feel the weight of his gaze. For you, Eliza blinked, uncertain if she had heard correctly. She swallowed, her throat raw, then whispered, Why? Why would a man she had been taught to fear extend kindness when her own people had left her to burn? Why would the so-called savage offer food and warmth while the civilized had stolen both her dignity and her voice? Dakota's shoulders tensed. Memories pressed hard against him. His younger sister's screams when soldiers dragged her into the snow. His mother's sobs when they found her body days later. The bitterness of helplessness. He had sworn never to bow to pity again, never to soften for the settlers who called his people animals. Yet here he was, and he could not walk away. When he finally turned, his expression was carved from stone, but his eyes betrayed something softer. "My sister once begged for mercy," he said. His words were steady, but his voice cracked on the last syllable. No one listened. Galiza's lips parted, but no sound came. She looked into his eyes and saw, for the first time, not just an Apache warrior, but a brother who had carried grief into manhood like a second skin. The fire crackled between them. Smoke spiraled into the night, carrying with it the scent of cedar and ash. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was heavy, crowded with everything they could not yet say. Eliza finally pulled the quilt tighter and whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." Dakota shook his head once. "Do not thank me, Lev. That is enough." She lowered her eyes, tears streaking through the soot on her face. The fire's warmth reached her, but it was not what made her shiver. What unsettled her most was the realization that the man she should have feared the most had given her more safety in one night than her own kind had in months. Dakota sat back on his heels, scanning the horizon, listening to the night. The riders who had done this would not stay gone. The earth had a way of carrying guilt on its wind, and he could feel it pressing closer. Eliza's trembling hand clutched the quilt again, her whisper carrying across the flames. "They'll come back, won't they?" Dakota's storm-dark eyes never left the horizon. "Yes," he said simply, "and when they do, you must decide whether to remain silent or to speak the truth." The fire crackled softly, its light licking across Dakota's chest, casting shifting shadows over the beads and bone pendants he wore. The warmth touched Eliza too, but she did not relax. She sat rigid across from him, clutching the quilt tighter, her body trembling beneath it. Each time the fire popped, she flinched. Each gust of night wind stirred the ashes around them, reminding her of the barn, of the men, of everything taken from her in one violent storm. Dakota had seen warriors broken by hunger, by bullets, by years of exile. He had never seen someone broken in this way, yet still clinging to life, fragile but unyielding. She did not beg for pity. She only begged for her last shred of dignity, the fabric pressed to her skin. After some time, Dakota pushed the pouch of venison closer across the dirt. "You must eat," he said, his voice deep and measured. Eliza shook her head. Her throat felt too tight, her stomach churned too violently. She pressed her lips together and shook harder, as if denying food could undo the shame carved into her body. Dakota didn't argue. He leaned back, staring into the flames, his long black hair rippling as the desert wind shifted. His silence was not heavy with anger, but with patience. He could wait. Minutes bled into an hour. Coyotes howled far off on the ridge. Somewhere an owl called into the night. At last Eliza reached trembling fingers toward the pouch. She tore a strip of venison, chewed slowly, and swallowed as though each bite scraped her raw throat. Dakota did not smile, but his dark eyes softened. He reached into his own pack and pulled free a woven blanket, his people's craft, dyed in red, ochre, and black, the patterns telling stories older than the town that had been built here. He placed it gently beside the fire between them. "For you," he said again. Eliza glanced at it, then back at him. Her lips quivered. I already have one." She tugged the scorched quilt tighter, its frayed edges curling around her neck. Dakota's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying a quiet weight. "That quilt hides you, but it does not heal you." Her eyes widened. "You don't understand." He tilted his head, his gaze steady. "Then show." M.A. Eliza's breath caught. Panic surged in her chest, stronger than the fire's heat. She shrank back, pressing her spine against the broken beam, shaking her head violently. "No, Please, you don't know what they did. You don't know how ugly." Her voice cracked, choking on shame. Dakota rose. The firelight painted his muscular frame in bronze and shadow, the tribal jewelry across his chest gleaming faintly. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, slow as if approaching a wild, wounded animal. His shadow fell over her, but his eyes held no cruelty, only something fierce and human, something she hadn't seen in any man that night. He crouched before her, not reaching, not forcing, just watching her through the strands of black hair that fell across his face. His voice dropped lower, rougher. "I know what men can do. I have seen it. I have lost to it. My sister." He stopped, swallowing hard before continuing. "My sister begged as you beg now, but no one listened. No one came." Eliza's breath hitched. Her fingers clenched in the fabric until her knuckles blanched white. His words settled into her like stones into water, rippling outward, making her see not a savage enemy but a brother who had also been left powerless. Her throat burned as tears welled again. Slowly, almost against her will, she loosened her grip on the quilt. Not all the way, just enough to let the firelight touch her shoulder. Dakota's chest rose sharply. Beneath the soot and ash, her skin was marred with bruises, deep purple and black. Thin cuts crisscrossed her arms. And at the edge of her collarbone, barely visible under the quilt, a raw burn gleamed angry red. He shut his eyes briefly, as if the sight struck deeper than an arrow. When he opened them, fury burned there, but it wasn't aimed at her. Eliza's voice came, barely a whisper. "Now you see." Dakota's breath shuddered. He reached slowly for his blanket, lifting it in both hands. With a solemnity that felt like ceremony, he draped it carefully around her shoulders, layering it over the scorched quilt, not taking, but giving. His people's blanket carried the scent of sage, of smoke, of desert winds. It enveloped her, and for the first time that night, she felt not naked, not broken, but sheltered. Takode leaned closer, his voice hoarse. "No one should see you as they did. But I see you now, and you are not shame. You are still here." Eliza's tears fell freely. The fire cracked, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. In that moment, in the ruins of everything she had known, she realized this stranger, this Apache warrior, had given her more than food, more than warmth. He had given her back the smallest fragment of her own worth. And for Dakota, the blanket was no longer just a covering. It was a vow. The fire's glow flickered low, painting the ash-coated earth in red and gold. Eliza Monroe sat with both blankets wrapped around her, her father's ruined quilt beneath, Dakota's woven gift above. The weight of them pressed against her shoulders, heavy yet strangely steadying. For the first time since the barn burned, her shivers slowed. Takode crouched on the opposite side of the fire, his broad chest rising and falling, his obsidian eyes fixed not on her, but on the darkness beyond the ruins. He listened to the night as only a warrior could, measuring the silence, the distant cries of coyotes, the rustle of wind through scorched beams. But his ears were tuned also to her breathing, shallow and uneven, as if each inhale fought a battle against memories clawing to the surface. At last her voice broke the stillness. "They came last night." Dakota's gaze shifted to her, steady, patient. Eliza clutched the blankets tighter. The firelight revealed her trembling lips. The soot streaked across her cheek. The way her eyes darted down as if ashamed of the words she carried. "My father." He tried to stop them. Her throat tightened. He fired his shotgun first, but there were too many. They laughed when he missed, laughed like it was a game. Her voice cracked, splintering against the memory. She stared into the fire as though she could see the moment replaying there. They tied him, beat him. Then they set the barn alight. The horses screamed. I ran in to cut their ropes, but one of the men grabbed me. Takota's jaw flexed. His knuckles pressed into the dirt until his veins bulged. But he said nothing. He knew that if he interrupted, the fragile stream of her words might dry up forever. Eliza swallowed hard, her voice dropping to a whisper. They tore the dress off my back. Not because they wanted me. No, they wanted me to feel like nothing. Less than nothing. They held me down while the fire grew. They said if my father didn't give them the land papers, they'd leave me in the flames. Her tears finally broke free, rolling silently down her cheeks. When he refused, they whipped me. They pressed a hot brand against my shoulder. They left me there, naked in the dirt, and lit the barn higher. I thought it would be the last thing I ever felt. Her voice dissolved into silence. Takota's breath came, ragged, deep from his chest. His people had known cruelty, but hearing her whisper the details, seeing the shame knotting her shoulders, shook something in him. He rose to his feet slowly, his shadow stretching long and dark in the firelight. Eliza flinched, shrinking back, clutching the blankets closer. But instead of stepping closer, Takota turned his face to the wind. He lifted his arms, clenched fists trembling at his sides. For a long moment he simply breathed, fighting the storm that roared inside him. Then, in a voice low and raw, he spoke not to her, but to the night. White men call my people savages. Yet who are these men? Who laughs while a father is beaten, while a daughter is branded like cattle? The fire popped, sparks spiraling upward. His dark hair whipped across his shoulders, his tribal jewelry catching faint glimmers of light as his chest heaved. He looked back at Eliza then, his gaze burning, not with anger at her, but with a vow unspoken. Her wide eyes searched his face. She had expected hatred, disgust, maybe even mockery. Instead, she saw a reflection of her own pain, fury at injustice, grief for what could never be undone. Her lips trembled. "Please," she whispered, "don't tell anyone what you saw. If you speak of it, I won't survive the shame." Takota crouched again, bringing his gaze level with hers. His voice softened, but it still carried the weight of command. "Shame is not yours. It belongs to the men who did this." Eliza's tears fell harder. She buried her face in the woven blanket, inhaling the faint sage scent that clung to it. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe his words, allowed herself to imagine that she was not broken beyond repair. Takota placed one strong hand against the earth between them, grounding himself. His storm-dark eyes did not leave hers. "They will return for you, or for your father's land. When they do, you must speak. If you stay silent, they will keep burning barns, keep branding daughters." Her breath hitched. Speaking the truth meant defying not only the men who hurt her, but the entire town that might side with them. It meant choosing survival over silence. And yet, as she looked into Takota's eyes that had seen his own family torn apart, eyes that carried grief and honor in equal measure, something inside her shifted. Maybe she was not alone in her ashes after all. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faint and red like eyes peering from the earth. Eliza Monroe sat curled beneath the heavy layers of cloth, her voice silenced after hours of trembling confessions. She could not bear to say more. Every word had left her feeling skinned, raw, hollow. Takota had listened without interruption, his broad shoulders carved into the shadows, his long hair falling like a dark river down his chest. He had said little, but she had felt his every breath, heard his every growl of anger swallowed back into silence. Now, as the night stretched thin and brittle, Takota rose. His frame filled the ruined barn's doorway where firelight licked the edges of his skin. He was shirtless still, his bronze flesh catching the glow of the embers, tribal jewelry resting against the rise and fall of his chest. "Eliza," he said, voice low, steady, dangerous in its restraint. You carry the burden of their cruelty, but you hide it like it is yours. Show me. Her fingers gripped the blankets tighter. No. You think I will turn away if I see? His eyes searched hers, unrelenting. That I will call you unclean? Broken? Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. You don't understand. If you see, it will be real. I'll never be able to pretend again. Dakota stepped. Closer, slow, deliberate. The fire caught in his eyes two burning coals, steady and furious. It is already real. The only lie is the silence. She shook her head violently, tears springing to her eyes. Please, don't take the blanket off. I am not wearing my clothes. The words burst from her like a wound tearing open. Her voice cracked in desperation, trembling with both shame and fear. Dakota stopped, his breath rough, his fists curling at his sides. For a long moment he said nothing. Only the pop of burning wood filled the silence. Then he knelt in front of her, lowering his towering form until his eyes were level with hers. I will not take what is not freely given, he said softly. Though his voice trembled with suppressed rage not at her, but at those who had branded her flesh. But you ask me to fight for you blind. I cannot protect what I cannot see. Her lips parted, her heart thundered in her chest. Could she? Could she bear the weight of another's gaze upon her scarred body? Shame pressed down like stone, but beneath it flickered something else, something fragile. Trust. Her fingers hesitated at the edge of the blanket. For a moment she froze, her entire body rigid with terror. Then, with a sob that rattled her lungs, she loosened her grip. The quilt slid first, then the woven blanket, until both slipped from her shoulders and pooled at her waist. The firelight revealed the truth. Her skin, once pale and smooth, bore the map of her suffering. Angry welts stretched across her arms. Dark bruises marred her ribs. On her left shoulder, a fresh brand, a circle with jagged edges, burned crimson against her flesh. Dakota's breath caught in his throat. His dark eyes widened, then narrowed in anguish. For the first time since she had met him, the warrior looked shattered. His hands trembled as though the earth itself had betrayed him. Eliza turned her face away, choking on her own shame. She expected silence, or perhaps worse, a sound of disgust, rejection. Instead, Dakota lowered his head. His forehead touched the ground at her feet. His long hair fell like a curtain over the dirt. His broad shoulders bent in grief. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, almost breaking. Forgive me. Forgive me for arriving too late to stop them. Forgive me that the world allows such evil to live. Eliza's eyes widened. No man, not even her father, had ever wept for her pain. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Why do you care? You owe me nothing. Dakota raised his head slowly. His eyes, wet with unshed tears, met hers. I care because pain like yours should never be hidden. Because you are not ruined, Eliza Monroe. You are proof of survival. The words struck her harder than any blow she had endured. Something inside her cracked, not from pain, but from release. The tears that poured down her cheeks were no longer of shame alone. Dakota reached forward with both hands, then stopped just short of touching her, waiting. When she gave the faintest nod, he cupped her arms with a tenderness that seemed impossible for a man of his strength. His thumbs brushed the bruises with reverence, as though each mark was a testament, not a stained dot in the firelight. Scar and survivor, warrior and wounded, faced one another not as enemies of circumstance, but as two souls bearing the same truth, that the world had tried to destroy them, and yet here they were breathing. And for the first time since the barn had burned, Eliza felt a spark of something she thought had died forever. Hope. The night air carried the acrid scent of ash and smoke, lingering like a curse over the ruins of the Monroe Ranch. The fire had sunk low, leaving only a bed of glowing embers, but Dakota still knelt before Eliza, his forehead pressed against the dirt, his long black hair spilling across his shoulders. Eliza Monroe sat motionless, the blankets gathered again around her trembling frame. Her scars still burned, her shame still gnawed, but something had shifted since he bowed before her. A warrior had seen her wounds and wept, not with disgust, but with reverence. It both terrified and steadied her. At last, Dakota rose. His broad chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his muscles rigid beneath the faint glow. He towered in the ruined barn doorway, shirtless, the faint gleam of tribal jewelry etched against his skin. His fists clenched until his knuckles turned pale beneath bronze flesh. "They will come again," he said, his voice low but cutting like a blade. "Men like that never stop with one fire. They take until there is nothing left." Eliza's eyes lifted toward him, wide and uncertain. "You don't know them. You don't know what they're capable of." Dakota's gaze hardened. "I know, because I have seen it before. My village was burned when I was a boy. The same laughter you heard, my ears still remember it." His voice deepened, carrying both grief and rage. "But I was too young then, too weak. I am not weak now." Eliza swallowed. She could almost see the ghosts of his past in the firelight, the same cruelty she had suffered, carved into his soul years before. Dakota stepped closer, each movement deliberate, his presence overwhelming yet steady. He crouched near her once. More, his voice quiet, fierce. "I swear by the blood of my people and the ashes of yours, I will not let them return unpunished. I will find them, Eliza, and I will make them answer for every brand, every bruise, every scream." Her lips trembled. His words were like a hammer striking against the wall of silence she had built around herself. "And what if you can't?" she whispered. He tilted his head, his long black hair falling forward, his storm-dark eyes burning into hers. "Then I die trying," her breath caught. No one had ever spoken such a vow for her, not her father, not her neighbors, not anyone. For the first time since the barn burned, she felt less like prey waiting for the next strike and more like someone worth fighting for. Dakota straightened again, turning his face toward the horizon where the faintest streak of gray marked the coming dawn. His profile was fierce against the light, jaw tight, eyes narrowed, muscles taut like a drawn bow. He looked every inch the warrior he was. Eliza's voice wavered when she spoke. "If you go after them, they'll kill you. They're not just farmhands, Dakota. They're part of something larger. They work for men with power in this town." He turned back to her, his gaze unwavering. "Then it is not only revenge, it is justice. And justice must be taken by those who have the courage to claim it." Her chest ached with the weight of his certainty. For a moment, she saw herself not as the broken girl in torn blankets, but as someone who might stand beside him, someone who could fight in her own way. Slowly, she pulled the blankets tighter around her shoulders and lifted her chin. Her voice was faint, but steadier than before. "If you fight them, I'll testify. I'll tell what they did to me, to my father, to the land." Dakota's eyes softened. He had expected her silence, her fear. Instead, he found her resolve. "Your words will burn hotter than any fire they lit," he said. The embers flared as if stirred by unseen hands. In that moment, amid ruins and scars, a vow was forged. Dakota would carry the blade, Eliza would carry the truth. And together they would face the men who thought themselves untouchable. For the first time since the night began, the stars overhead seemed brighter, as though the heavens bore witness to their pact. Eliza looked into the flames and whispered, to herself, not in fear, but in quiet defiance, "They took everything from me, but they will not take tomorrow." Dakota heard, and though he did not smile, a faint spark flickered in his eyes, hope sharpened into steel. The first rays of dawn stretched across the blackened fields, lighting the scorched earth in muted gold. Smoke still curled from the charred timbers of the Monroe barn, rising like ghostly fingers into the pale morning sky. Eliza Monroe sat wrapped in her blankets near the fire's dying embers, her body sore, her heart unsteady but burning with a fragile new strength. Beside her, Dakota stood unmoving, a living statue of resolve. Shirtless, his broad chest scarred and gleaming in the morning light, his long black hair whipped gently in the breeze. The tribal jewelry that hung from his neck and arms caught the dawn's glow like fragments of fire. He looked every inch the warrior of his vow, a storm waiting to be unleashed. Eliza's eyes followed his gaze. On the horizon, dust rose in a thin column. The riders were coming back. Her stomach twisted. She clutched the blanket tighter. "It's them," she whispered. Dakota did not flinch. His voice was calm, steady. "Yes." The distant thunder of hooves grew louder, filling the still morning with dread. 5 riders emerged from the dust, broad-shouldered men with rifles slung across their backs, their faces hard and smug with the confidence of predators returning to their kill. They slowed as they approached the ruins, grins spreading when they saw the lone girl by the fire. One of them, a tall man with a black hat and cruel eyes, spat into the dirt. "Well, well, the little rabbit's still here. Thought the fire would have cooked you through." His gaze slid toward the ruins. "And where's your daddy now, girl? Burned up with the barn?" Eliza's breath hitched, but Dakota's hand brushed her shoulder lightly, a touch as firm as it was reassuring. She looked up at him and found his eyes steady, a silent command. "Stand strong." Dakota stepped forward. The men sneered when they saw him, their laughter ringing sharp and ugly. "Look at this," another rider jeered. Girl's gone and found herself a red savage for company. The leader tipped his hat, smirking. "You planning to trade her, Injun? Or just take her for yourself?" Dakota's voice cut through their laughter, low and cold. "You will answer for what you did." The men roared with laughter, the sound echoing off the blackened ruins. "Here. That, boys? He thinks he's the law." But their laughter died when Dakota moved. With a speed that startled even Eliza, he drew the blade strapped to his belt, an obsidian knife that gleamed like midnight. His stance was unshakable, his eyes like coals burning in the dawn. The leader sneered, pulling his rifle free. "You think you can fight all of us?" "I do not think," Dakota said. His voice was a growl, deep as the earth itself. "I know." The standoff crackled like lightning in dry air. Eliza rose unsteadily to her feet, clutching the blanket, but refusing to sit silent. Her voice, hoarse but clear, rang across the ruined yard. "They branded me," she shouted, her words trembling but fierce. "They whipped me, stripped me, left me to burn alive. And they laughed while my father bled in the dirt." The men froze. Their grins faltered. Not because they felt guilt, but because the mask of their crime had been torn away in daylight. Dakota's eyes never left them. The world knows now, and the world will not forget. The leader snarled, raising his rifle. "Then we'll make sure the world never hears another word from either of you." It happened in a blur. The crack of gunfire split the morning. Dakota lunged, his blade flashing. Eliza dropped to the ground as bullets tore through the air, splintering charred wood. The clash was brutal, primal steel against flesh, fire against fury. When the dust settled, the riders lay broken among the ruins, their arrogance crushed beneath the weight of a warrior's vow. Dakota stood over them, chest heaving, his blade dark with blood, his body glistening with sweat. Eliza, trembling, rose slowly to her feet. Her heart pounded in her chest, but when her eyes met Dakota's, she did not see the savage the men had mocked. She saw the man who had wept for her scars bowed his head to her pain and fought like the storm itself to defend her. The dawn stretched wider across the horizon, gilding the wreckage in light. Eliza pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her chin lifting, her eyes no longer filled with only fear. "They thought they could burn us down," she whispered, her voice steady now. "But we're still standing." Takota's chest rose and fell, his gaze fierce yet softened as it settled on her. "Yes," he said, his voice like stone and fire, "and we will keep standing." Together they turned toward the rising sun, two survivors forged in fire and bound by a vow that no flame, no cruelty, no man could break.